You know, if you wanted to leave a time capsule for future generations to understand exactly how we envision the future, you wouldn't bury a sci-fi novel.
Right, or like a blueprint of a flying car or something.
Exactly. You would bury a rhythm, a
Yeah.
very specific mechanical booming rhythm.
Because the way a society imagines its own future isn't just written down, it's something you can actually hear.
Right. And right now we are unpacking a really fascinating piece from Monumental Movement Records, or MMR.
Yeah, an incredible deep dive on their end.
Totally. They argued that this exact futuristic sound was born from just a single machine. The column is titled Electro, the rhythm of the future city carved by machines.
Such a great title.
It really is. And our mission for you listening today is to trace the DNA of this sound. We're going from its birth alongside 1980s breakdancing right through to the sort of fractured global dance floors of today.
It's a compelling argument, too, because we often treat musical genres as just, collections of aesthetic choices.
Like, oh, they just liked how the synthesizer sounded.
Right, exactly. But what MMR is laying out here is that electro is not just a genre. It represents a fundamental shift in how humans and machines collaborate to create art.
It's a dialogue.
It really is. The machine offers this rigid mathematical pulse, and the human producer bends it, syncopates it, and injects it with a physical, sweating reality.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to really understand this human-machine collaboration, we have to go back to the early 1980s,
Oh,
to the Bronx.
the absolute birthplace.
Yeah, we all know the classic electro kit, right? The massive sub-kick, the synthetic snare.
Yeah.
But what MMR highlights isn't just the instrumentation.
No, it's the mathematical rigidity of how those sequences were programmed.
Right, and at the dead center of that is the Roland TR-808 drum machine.
The 808 is the absolute beating heart of this entire movement. And to understand why it changed everything, we have to look at how it actually generated sound.
Because it wasn't like modern samplers, right?
Not at all. Unlike later drum machines, like the Lindrum, which used digital recordings of real acoustic drums, the 808 was entirely analog.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it used transistor circuits to synthesize sounds from scratch. So it didn't sound like a drum. It sounded like a machine trying to remember what a drum was.
Wait, if it was originally meant to replace acoustic drummers for musicians to practice?
Which was the original pitch, yeah.
I mean, I can totally see why it was a commercial failure at first. It sounds like a tin can being hit by a laser.
Exactly.
It has this incredibly artificial, almost alien sweep to it. But that exact flaw is what made it perfect for a sci-fi aesthetic.
Precisely. The mainstream music industry rejected it because of that artificiality. But the youth in the Bronx, they weren't looking for a traditional drummer.
They wanted something new.
Right. They were looking for a sound that matched the robotic, angular, physically demanding movements of a brand new culture, which was breakdancing.
So the machine fit the movement perfectly.
Exactly. And the 808 had a specific circuit, a bridge T oscillator that allowed the kick drum sound to decay over a long period. You could turn up the decay knob, and the kick wouldn't just hit. It would ring out and physically shake the floorboards.
It's like, well, the TR-808 in the 80s was the exact equivalent of the electric guitar in the 50s.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. The electric guitar didn't just play notes. It was this piece of hardware that birthed an entirely new youth culture, a whole new physical attitude.
It changed how people carried themselves.
Exactly. And the 808 did the same thing. It was generating a new way of moving, a new way of taking up space in the city. And the watershed moment for that was 1982.
Ah, yes. Planet Rock.
Yeah, when Afrika Bambaataa and the Soul Sonic Force dropped Planet Rock.
Planet Rock is where the synthesis happens. Bambaataa and his producer Arthur Baker did something structurally ingenious there.
What'd they do?
They reached across the Atlantic and interpolated the cold, precise electronic melodies of Kraftwerk.
Oh, specifically Trans-Europe Express, right?
That one and Numbers. But they didn't just copy it. They took those stiff European synthesizer lines and aggressively fused them with the booming, heavily syncopated street beat of the 808.
They completely changed the bounce.
Totally.
They took a grid that was very straight and injected it with swing. You have the robotic avant-garde laboratories of Germany crashing headfirst into the physical reality of a Bronx block party.
It was revolutionary.
And from the MMR column, it's clear this wasn't just an East Coast phenomenon. The aesthetic mutated as it hit the West Coast.
Oh, massively.
Like you look at Egyptian Lover with a track like Egypt.
Yeah, Egyptian Lover took that same intricate synthesis but manipulated the tempos and the atmosphere.
He gave it a totally different flavor.
He really did. He used the 808 to create a very West Coast, sexually decadent vibe. He was programming these incredibly fast, skittering hi-hats over that booming analog bass.
Which gave the music a frantic but still deeply hypnotic energy.
Exactly. And the visual aesthetic of the time reflects that completely.
Oh man, the visuals. You look at the culture surrounding these tracks. It was silver costumes, metallic visors, cyber-style stage shows.
It was so wild.
It looked like an early sci-fi movie come to life.
Yeah.
It was a visual manifestation of this fusion between the street and the machine.
Which is why you cannot separate the audio from the multisensory culture.
Right, they're completely tied together.
The music provided the architectural blueprint, but the physical act of breakdancing, the street fashion, the graffiti art, that was the building itself. The machine provided the infrastructure for human expression.
So we established this massive explosion of physical, party-focused energy in New York and LA.
Right.
But as the 80s bleed into the 90s, the MMR piece shows us that the sound travels. And the environment it lands in changes its DNA.
It gets darker.
Yeah. It moves from the block parties to the post-industrial warehouses of Detroit.
And Detroit is where electro begins to intersect heavily with the birth of techno. The socioeconomic landscape of Detroit at that time is crucial here.
The auto industry, right?
Exactly. You have a city famous for automotive manufacturing going through massive industrial decline. The factories are emptying out.
Wow, so the city is literally changing shape.
Yeah. And the artists living there take these discarded or cheap drum machines and start making music that reflects that environment. The machines that used to build cars were now being used to build a new sonic landscape.
It becomes much more conceptual. And that brings us to Juan Atkins, working under the alias Model 500.
A true legend.
He is widely considered a pioneer of techno, but the column points out that he freely crossed the boundaries between techno and electro.
Atkins was a bridge. He proved that the futuristic hip-hop of the Bronx and the industrial futurism of Detroit were operating on the exact same frequency.
He was using the same gear, right?
Yeah, same 808s and analog synths. But he was composing arrangements that were colder, more stripped back, and highly atmospheric.
Setting the stage for what came next.
Exactly. His work laid the structural groundwork for what would eventually become IDM-intelligent dance music and glitch electronica, where the focus shifted from the dance floor to the intricacies of the sound design itself.
And if we're talking about high-concept Detroit electro, we have to talk about Drexciya.
We have to.
The MMR article spends a lot of time on this duo, specifically highlighting their 1999 work, Neptune's Lair. The lore they created is famously intricate.
It's unbelievable.
They were literally building a mythical underwater civilization through these uncompromising, aggressive electro beats.
It's one of the most ambitious conceptual projects in modern music, really. They were using the stark, repetitive nature of the drum machines to score a completely alternate reality.
It wasn't just party music anymore.
No, they weren't just writing tracks. They were writing sonic literature about an aquatic race descended from pregnant African women thrown overboard during the Middle Passage.
Which is incredibly heavy.
Deeply political, deeply mythological, and entirely communicated through instrumental electronic music.
But wait, I have to push back on this a bit.
Sure.
You're taking this raw, physical, breakdancing party music and turning it into a hyper-dense mythological museum piece.
Yeah.
If I go to a club expecting to dance and the DJ is trying to educate me on an underwater civilization, doesn't that high art concept completely kill the party vibe?
Honestly, sometimes it did.
Really?
Yeah. If you walked into a Detroit warehouse expecting a mindless, easy party, a Drexciya set could absolutely alienate you. It was abrasive and unapologetic.
It wasn't for everyone.
Not at all. But for the core audience, that alienation was the point. What's fascinating here is how the rigidity of the machine beats actually served as a blank canvas.
A blank canvas. How so?
Well, because the rhythm is so mathematically locked in, so relentless, it frees up your cognitive space. You aren't trying to figure out the groove. Your body just locks into it automatically.
Oh, I see.
And once your body is occupied by the machine, the producer can layer these vast sci-fi narratives over the top straight into your mind.
That makes a lot of sense, actually.
Like,
The math of the 808 handles the physical reality so the synthesizers can handle the cerebral reality.
exactly.
You aren't just hearing a song. You're exploring a world through the frequencies.
That was exactly the intent. The 90s took electro deep underground. It became highly conceptual, heavily analyzed, and deeply influential to a generation of electronic musicians who viewed the studio as a laboratory.
But evolution requires new environments. If a sound is going to survive and not just become an academic exercise, it needs a new catalyst.
Always.
And as we cross into the 2000s, the MMR piece highlights a wild left turn. The catalyst for electro's return to the mainstream wasn't a new synthesizer. It was the fashion industry.
Yeah, the early 2000s saw the eruption of electroclash. It was a microgenre, but it burned incredibly bright and completely reset the aesthetic of dance music.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
It's like the music completely changed his wardrobe.
It totally did.
It traded the silver tracksuits and the conceptual Detroit warehouses for tailored leather jackets, smudged eyeliner, and Parisian fashion runways.
It got glamorous.
Yeah, it stopped being strictly about the future and started being about this hyper-glamorous, decadent present.
Artists like Miss Kitten and the Hacker, who released their seminal first album in 2001, along with groups like Fisher Spooner and Adult, were the architects of this shift.
They really defined that era.
They took the cold, synthetic skeletons of 80s electro, but they stripped away the breakdance swing. Instead, they coded those analog sounds in a DIY punk attitude and a very European VIP room detachment.
The vocals changed too, right?
Yeah, the vocals were often deadpan, almost spoken word, draped over these raw, buzzing synthesizer lines.
It was chic, but it was aggressive. And that electro-clash attitude of merging punk aesthetics with electronic gear paved the way for something massive, which was electro house.
A huge mutation in the DNA.
Right. French and German artists took those abrasive, buzzing electro riffs and quite literally smashed them into the standard four-on-the-floor kick drum pattern of house music.
The mechanics of that shift are vital to understand. Electro historically relied on syncopation. Broken beats, kicking on the offbeats.
But house music is different.
House music is a steady pulse. Boom, 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 boom. By forcing the chaotic, screaming synthesizers of electro onto the rigid marching grid of house music, it created an unbelievable amount of kinetic energy.
And you cannot talk about that era of kinetic energy without talking about Justice.
Absolutely not.
The French duo. Their 2007 debut album, Cross, on Ed Banger Records. I mean, if you were anywhere near a music festival in the late 2000s, that album was inescapable.
It was everywhere.
But how did they actually make it sound so enormous? Because it didn't sound like traditional dance music. It sounded like a heavy metal concert.
Justice utilized an extreme form of a technique called sidechain compression.
How does that work?
They would program a massive kick drum, and they would route the compressor so that every single time the kick drum hit, the entire rest of the track, the bass, the samples, the synths would forcefully duck out of the way in volume.
Oh, and then it would bounce back.
Exactly. It immediately swells back up. It creates this intense, sucking, breathing, pumping effect.
It feels physically heavy.
Add in the fact that they were running their synthesizers through distortion pedals, usually reserved for electric guitars, and you get that stadium-sized aggression. It was the DNA of electro, but engineered to sound like it was tearing the speakers apart.
They took that fusion of human sweat and machine precision and cranked the threshold to the absolute maximum.
And they snagged a Grammy nomination for it, proving the sound could headline global festivals.
They weren't alone in that space either. The MMR column points to the Canadian duo MSTR-KRFT.
Yeah, formed by Jesse F. Keeler of the punk dance band Death from Above 1979 alongside Alpi.
A great example of that era.
They are another perfect example of how the Electro Foundation could be weaponized. They took the analog synthesizers and made them sound like they were sweating in a mosh pit.
So we've gone from the Bronx to Detroit to Paris and massive global festivals.
A wild ride.
Which leads to the obvious question. If Justice pushed that specific overdriven sound as far as it could go, where did the genre go next?
It's a good question.
Because if you look at the charts today, you don't necessarily see songs labeled Electro House dominating. So what does this all mean for the music you're listening to right now?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the mark of truly successful musical DNA isn't that it stays rigid and isolated forever.
Wait.
It's that it splinters and gets completely absorbed by the host culture. If Justice proved you could push the 808's DNA to the absolute limits of volume, the next logical step wasn't to get louder, it was to become the foundation of everything else.
So it just blended in.
Electro never died. It simply became the architectural water we swim in for modern music.
Give me a specific example. Where is the average listener hearing this Bronx-born 808-driven DNA today without even realizing it.
You are hearing it in almost all modern trap and bass music.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the entire rhythmic structure of trap is a direct linear descendant of early electro programming. Let's look at the mechanics of the 808 kick again.
The long decay we talked about.
Exactly. Because it's a synthesized sub-bass frequency with a long decay, it leaves a massive amount of space in the middle and high frequencies of the EQ spectrum.
So you can fit other stuff in there.
Right. Modern trap producers tune that 808 kick drum so it actually plays a melody, acting as the bass line, while rapid-fire 30-second note hi-hats dictate the groove over the top.
Wow.
That sonic formula, which dominates global pop and hip-hop today, is exactly what Egyptian Lover and Afrika Bambaataa were experimenting with 40 years ago.
That is wild to trace. A synthesizer circuit misfiring in a Japanese factory in 1980 becomes the exact frequency rattling the trunk of a car, playing a #1 pop hit today.
It's all connected.
But the MMR column also emphasizes that the pure, unfiltered form of electro is still out there, right? It hasn't entirely dissolved into pop music.
Oh, not at all. The pure forms are fiercely protected and thriving, often categorized today under techno or IDM subgenres, and it's a truly global language.
Right. The article highlights the scene in Japan.
Yes, specifically artists like Kenichi and Gothtrad.
I love that the piece points them out, because they aren't just doing some nostalgic imitation of the Detroit or New York sound.
No, they're pushing it forward.
They are using that mathematical electro foundation, the dry snares, the analog synths, but applying their own cultural interpretations and spatial sound design to it.
The electronic ecosystem is remarkably vast. To understand how deeply entrenched these roots are, you just have to look at the veteran producers MMR recommends at the end of their column.
Yeah, the listening list.
These are the architects keeping the pulse alive across various permutations.
The recommended listening list is fantastic. They highlight Dubfire, which is the alias of Ali Shirazenia, an Iranian US DJ.
A huge name.
He actually has deep roots in the mainstream, too. He's nominated for a Grammy back in 2006 with his duo Deep Dish for the track Say Hello.
You also have figures like Boys Noise, Alexander Rita out of Berlin. He has spent decades keeping that abrasive, high-energy, analog electro-techno sound completely vital and uncompromising.
And there is some wildly surprising lineage in that list, too. Louis Osborne is featured.
Yes, as in the son of Ozzy Osbourne.
It's crazy. He's an established producer making techno and tech house touch. It just proves that this specific machine-driven rhythm has infiltrated literally every corner of the musical world, completely regardless of your background or traditional rock lineage.
It perfectly validates the column's title. It is the rhythm of the future city, and it was carved by these machines, adopted by humans across every continent.
So, to bring this massive timeline together, we've traced an incredible journey today.
We really have.
We started at a sweaty Bronx block party where DJs manipulated the analog circuitry of a Roland TR-808 to create a new physical swing.
Then to Detroit.
Right, we traveled to the post-industrial warehouses of Detroit, where those exact same synthetic beats were used to build mythological underwater civilizations.
Then Paris.
We strutted through Paris fashion shows covered in leather, utilizing extreme sidechain compression to make synthesizers scream like heavy metal guitars.
Then finally today.
And finally, we arrived at the trap beats and global festival anthems that are currently vibrating in your headphones right now.
It's a huge evolution.
And through all of those mutations, the core remains the same. As the MMR article concludes, electro is about that continuous, resonating co-vibration. It is the human soul pushing against the perfection of the machine.
And that co-vibration leads to a deeply provocative question about where we are heading right now.
What do you mean?
Well, the original 1980s pioneers viewed the drum machine as a tool to physically merge human street culture with futuristic technology. It was a partnership. The machine needed the human to program the swing.
Right, it couldn't do it alone.
But today, as we enter an era where AI can autonomously generate beats, mix tempos, and synthesize entirely new melodies without human input.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we have to ask, what happens to that co-vibration? If the machine no longer needs the human to dictate the rhythm, will the future city still have a human heartbeat? Or will electro's ultimate evolution be just machines talking to themselves?